Is this heaven?
No.
Is it H-E double hockey sticks?
Hell.
Quiet coyote.
On first glance, comparing the new Disney Pixar film Soul from last year to The Seventh Seal, the Ingmar Bergman film from 1957, might seem irrelevant, but I think they're actually more similar than we might think. Let's look at the similarities between the two films, their themes, and how they tell their stories. One note real quick right at the top is that I am by no means necessarily insinuating that Soul is as good of a movie as The Seventh Seal. The Seventh Seal is seen as one of the best international films ever made and one of the best films ever made. The Seventh Seal is a film that I really love, and it's arguably the masterpiece of incredibly prolific and acclaimed director Ingmar Bergman. I really enjoy both films, but I just want to say that the point of this is not to compare the quality of the two or make a claim about which one is better or that they're equal. It's just to look at how they both deal with similar themes and stories, even though they're aimed at wildly different audiences and were made 83 years apart. Also, if you're watching this video, I'm assuming you've seen Soul, and it would be great if you watched The Seventh Seal, but I'll try to stay away from major spoilers of The Seventh Seal, so you don't necessarily have to have watched The Seventh Seal to watch this video. In The Seventh Seal, a knight named Antonius Block is returning from the Crusades with his squire. As they're returning home, the Black Plague is hitting the area. Now that the Crusades are over, both the knight and his squire are sort of questioning the meaning of these crusades that they had gone on, and this is leading to the knight really questioning his faith and wondering if God is even real. Meanwhile, almost everyone else we meet is in some kind of turmoil because of the questions and implications of the Black Plague. To top this all off, at the beginning of the film, literal Death himself comes to visit the knight. And to delay his death, the knight works out a deal where he and Death are going to play a game of chess, and if the knight wins, he gets to stay alive. On the surface, Soul is about a music teacher named Joe who has loved jazz all his life. He believes it's his true life purpose to be able to play jazz, but he's faced numerous challenges in being able to make this a reality. He finally lands his big gig, but after playing it,
It's just, I've been waiting on this day for my entire life. I thought I'd feel different.
he's left questioning whether this path was really his purpose at all. To top it all off, in between getting and playing this gig, Joe actually dies, ends up in the space between the afterlife and Earth, where he meets the soul of someone who hasn't been born yet, who hasn't gotten to go to Earth because they're unable to find a spark. Basically anything in life that interests them. 22 chooses to stay in the Great Before because they feel life holds no meaning or purpose. They feel there's basically no point in becoming alive. Somehow these two end up back on Earth, but with Joe's soul in a cat and 22's soul in Joe's body, and there's a whole saga of adventures that eventually leads to them getting things sorted out. Those are very broad overviews and not very detailed, but I think they make my point that they're two very different movies on the surface. One is dealing with the medieval world, the Black Plague, and the other deals with a man living in modern day New York. The stories are framed very differently, but both feature characters that are sort of questioning the validity and purpose of what they're doing. Antonius Block is sort of questioning if the Crusades and his belief in God has really meant anything, and Joe, in the process of trying to attain his greatest dream and then attaining it, is questioning if that's truly his purpose and if that's where his value in life comes from. So the movies are framing the question and the ideas very differently, but they're both sort of examining the central idea of questioning your purpose or the meaning of life. And where they become very similar is, I think, in the answers that they each present. We can see the clearest parallel by comparing two scenes. This one from The Seventh Seal and this one from Soul. In Soul, 22 in Joe's body is sitting here, and they're about to get the opportunity to go back to the Great Before, where they want to stay for eternity. But then they have this experience in this moment, and that sort of convinces them of the value of life. In The Seventh Seal, Antonio Block is confessing to a priest who actually turns out to be Death instead of a priest. He's confessing his doubt about the existence of God to God, essentially, and is basically asking God to show him some kind of sign or break his silence. But the knight kind of finds an answer, purpose, or some direction in his life by experiencing the sun shining down on him and the living sort of wonder of his own hand. This is pretty similar to the kind of moment, feeling, or experience that Soul is evoking here, where 22 is seeing the warmth of the sunlight, catching the seed falling from the sky, and seeing wind blowing the leaves around on the sidewalk. In both Soul and The Seventh Seal, they're kind of presenting this idea that experiencing the beauty of the world can ground you and sort of provide meaning, purpose, or direction. So Joe is a jazz player, his spark is piano, and he gets to live his dream by performing as a jazz piano player, but he's still left questioning his purpose. He realizes, though, that his spark is not really his purpose, and he finds a sense of purpose in the sort of mundane beauty of the world. In The Seventh Seal, Antonius Block is a knight whose spark may be crusading and, going on religious wars, etc., etc. And when he comes back from that, having fulfilled these dreams or what he thought was his purpose, he realizes he doesn't have a sense of purpose anymore, or he questions whether or not that was truly his purpose. But he ends up finding a sort of purpose or direction in living his everyday life.
Solen står fortfarande högt på himlen. Och jag Antonius Block, spelar schack med döden.
And essentially playing a game of chess with death. The Seventh Seal has a lot of other themes and ideas at play, and this scene only happens about halfway through the film, so it develops a lot from there, whereas this idea is kind of all of what Soul is focused on. But both films are portraying characters that are encountering, grappling with death and trying to avoid it, and they use symbolic imagery to do that. The imagery they use is very different, but both films are drawing from culture to inform the symbolic imagery that they're using. For The Seventh Seal, Ingmar Bergman was pulling from the imagery he grew up seeing on frescoes in churches of death playing chess with characters and religious symbolic imagery that he would have been familiar with. Soul pulls from a wider variety of contemporary imagery. A lot of the way the metaphysical elements of Soul are represented, I think, draws from a sort of psychedelic new age representation of spirituality that's become more popular within the last century. It also invokes a sort of suggestion of simulation theory, perhaps, which is an idea that's kind of been gaining in prominence recently. Both films also deal with the theme of death and sort of present a metaphysical or spiritual reality in a way that seems to suggest it's really there. In The Seventh Seal, death is literally impersonated, and in Soul, we see the great before and people disappearing into the great beyond or something. But neither of these films actually present or show where this metaphysical power is really coming from, and they both avoid answering the question of what actually happens after death. Instead, they both suggest a sort of existentialism, showing that meaning can be found in our immediate experience. It's certainly not a perfect match, but it's interesting to see how two very different films from very different times can tackle a similar theme or idea in even similar ways while just being in wildly different stories and contexts. I don't know if The Seventh Seal was a direct influence on Pete Docter, Mike Jones, Kemp Powers, and the other people who wrote and directed Soul, but there's a good chance that they've seen The Seventh Seal since they work in the film industry and it's quite a famous, renowned classic film. And whether they were thinking of it or not, it's possible that it had some kind of influence on how they were looking at presenting these ideas or themes. It's also possible that they're completely unrelated. Nobody working on Soul ever saw The Seventh Seal, and they just came to similar conclusions about life and or how to present a certain idea on film in a story. If you want an interesting double feature, Watch Soul and The Seventh Seal back to back. I'm not sure which I would watch first. Maybe The Seventh Seal and then Soul. You'll end on a higher note that way, I think. That's it. I'm Thomas Flight. Thank you so much to my patrons for their ongoing support. If you want to be a part of the Discord, hear my podcast, or recommend a film for me to watch and then review as part of the Patron's Choice, you can become a patron today by going to patreon.com/ThomasFlight.